Hi, my name is Stuart Weems, and welcome to the Investopoly podcast. Our goal is to share easy to understand, evidence-based holistic insights to help you master the game of building wealth. And I've said before that I reckon there's only a handful of really key important decisions that you make in your lifetime that probably result in delivering most of your wealth, your financial outcomes. And I realized back 8 years ago when I first wrote Investopoly, of course this podcast is named after the book, I realized that people would come to me and we would speak to each other, and I was going through kind of the same sort of rules or processes to work out, what's their next best step. And that's what I wanted to do, is kind of write some evidence-based rules or kind of an operating system to help people nail those key decisions. I mean, the reality is there's not like a million different things that I need to decide or get right. They're just really these big rocks in life that, I need to sort of navigate. And that's why I've rewritten Investopoly completely. Wealth by Design now, it's called. And again, just to provide those rules. And I think I've really reflected a lot more work and nuance in those rules over the last 8 years. And that's why I really wanted to rewrite it, is because I thought I could do a much, much better job. And I think it is a much, much better book. And that's what I'm going to talk about on the Thursday episode. Second episode comes out this week. But for the next 8 weeks, I'm going to talk about, how has those rules changed? Some haven't changed that much. Maybe there's a little bit of tightening around the edges. Some have changed a lot. But on YouTube a few weeks ago, I was asked, what are those big life decisions? And I thought, yeah, good. Yeah, that's a really good question. And so I sort of sat back and wrote the blog, which obviously today's episode is based on. So there's four decisions that I think determine 95% of your outcomes, and some aren't that obvious. So let's get into those four decisions. Decision number one is your choice of partner, your choice of life partner if you have one, or if you're going to have one. Now, that might seem like an odd thing to say, given this is a very practical, fact-based finance podcast, but I'm convinced it's easily the most important financial decision you make. In fact, it could be the most important decision you make in your lifetime, full stop. And the reason I say that is that if you and your spouse or life partner, whatever the term, let's call it, if I say married or spouse, I'm just going to use them interchangeably. But if you're aligned when it comes to things like spending versus saving, borrowing, investing, then really everything else becomes dramatically easier. Because if you're on the same page and you both come to it with the same ideals, and those ideals are aligned with most of the things that I talk about in this blog, then the reality is you'll save more, invest more consistently, and avoid the common mistakes that people make. And the reality is that money is often cited in Australian and international research as the leading cause of relationship conflict. And so that's really mainly because of misalignment, I think. I mean, you think about, one person's really bad with money and the other person's really good with money. That's naturally going to create some conflict. I think, when I meet a lot of different people, of course, it's very uncommon, I guess, that they're both partners involved to the same extent. Normally, one partner will take the lead in, the financial management and financial decision making. And I guess that's mainly because, or probably because, someone has a natural leaning towards it. I mean, no prizes for guessing who does it in my family, for instance. But it only works, that you're well supported by your partner as well. So it's okay that one person takes the lead, and it's okay that one person, makes most of the decisions and takes on most of that, not responsibility, but responsibility for deciding which way to go. But support is still necessary from the other partner. Support to ask the right questions, to make sure they understand what's going on, because it's just as much their money as it is, the person that's making the decision. And also, you make the decision as a team, rather than just one person, so that if you both own the results of those decisions, and if those results are great, then you can, share the benefit of moving forward financially together. But if they're not so great or not as expected, then, you're both equally to blame, I guess, for the unexpected outcome. And that's what, in my view, the best partners. This is not a marriage counseling podcast, so I don't want it to blend into one. But I find that the couples that have a very harmonious and productive financial relationship are those where the non-dominant spouse, the non-financially dominant spouse, will still interrogate decisions to make sure they understand them. So they're not scared of asking the right questions or asking difficult questions before a decision is made. And so they're not completely passive. Now, there are some around. I do have some clients that have completely passive partners, and it worries me, to be honest, when that occurs, because, if things don't work out, do they really understand? Do they really know what's going on? Of course, I'm only judging on what I see and the interactions that I see. There's a lot that go on behind the scenes, so it's difficult for me to judge. But really, what you want in terms of who you're marrying, you want to be on the same page. It's okay if one partner takes the lead, but the other partner needs to be there as a support as well. The other thing I have experienced is that, one of the reasons sometimes people reach out for advice, ongoing advice, is they don't want the burden and responsibility of doing it. They acknowledge that their partner's maybe less interested or isn't naturally sort of leaning towards making financial decisions. So they acknowledge, okay, someone's got to do it. It may as well be me. But they don't necessarily want to take the full burden and responsibility for, carrying the outcome of those decisions solely on their shoulders. And so they're looking to share that burden with a professional. And so that's why, one partner being completely passive, as said, horses for courses, it can work in some situations, but it's really about providing good long-term support. Now, of course, we can kind of see that, if we're able to make really good quality decisions, we're all on the same page about, whether we go on holiday this year or buy an investment property or, borrow to invest in the share market, whatever it might be, just throwing off some ideas randomly, then of course we're going to be in a situation where we're most likely, save for any unforeseen circumstances, going to be financially secure, and that puts less strain on relationships. So we can see how marrying the right person is ideal or can be ideal. There's a blunter point here though, divorce is expensive. So if you don't marry the right person, you're going to have to unwind assets. It's emotionally expensive. It's financially expensive. An acrimonious family court matter, you might end up spending $100,000 per person in legal fees or more sometimes. And then you've got to sell assets maybe when the timing doesn't necessarily make sense to. You interrupt the investment strategy. It is not ideal. So, of course, it makes sense that if you're going to find the right person that you've got a genuine connection with, that if you're on the same page from a financial perspective, then it's going to be easy to make decisions that you're both really happy with. And you decide, when delayed gratification is appropriate and when it's not, because you've got to enjoy the journey as well. And then hopefully you keep that asset base intact for the rest of your life. So that's number one, who your partner is. Number two is your career choice. So the financial logic's obvious, right? Your lifetime earnings are the engine to your investment strategy. I mean, the difference between someone earning $100,000 over their entire life per annum or someone earning $250,000 per annum and spending the same amount on living expenses is huge. The investable surplus cash flow differential is massive. But also there's an enjoyment element to it as well. Enjoyment drives earnings more than I think most people appreciate. You spend roughly 80,000 hours of your life working. So people who genuinely enjoy what they do tend to be better at it, do it for longer, take on more responsibility, and as a result, earn more as well. And I remember reading this really impactful quote at the beginning of a book by Jack Daly. Jack Daly's a sales coach that does presentations around the world, pretty entertaining. Anyway, he wrote a book, and this quote, and it stayed with me. I mean, I read this probably 15 or more years ago, probably, and it stayed with me. So here's the quote. A master in the art of living draws no sharp distinction between his work and his play, his labour and his leisure. He simply pursues his vision of excellence through whatever he's doing and leaves others to determine whether he's doing it for work or whether he's playing. To himself, he's always doing both. And I thought that quote was really good. Whether it's your hobby or whether you're doing it as a job, shouldn't be obvious to other people. So look, I think if I wasn't working at Pro Solution, what would I do? I'd probably drive my wife mad, firstly, but I'd have to write. I'd have to write or keep doing the podcast or doing something like that. This is what I really enjoy doing. I love really thinking about ideas and having that intellectual curiosity around investing and even behavioral finance, these sorts of things, although I don't talk about a lot here. And that's what I enjoy doing. I enjoy, even I spend my leisure time reading articles or catching up on financial news, these sorts of things. It's my passion. I really enjoy doing it. And as a result, then I get to practice my passion. So that's why I thought that quote really resonated with me. Another thing that Jim Collins has said, he's famous for writing Good to Great, which is probably the best business book out there. And so he's an author, researcher. If you haven't seen any of his work and you're interested in that, I highly recommend it. But he came up with a practical framework for thinking about career choices. And he sort of described it as drawing a Venn diagram, so 3 intersecting circles. The first circle is what you're naturally good at, what you've got a talent for. The second circle is what you're genuinely passionate about. And the third circle is what can you make a good living from? And your ideal career sits at the intersection of those 3 circles. And so what are you naturally good at? He said he was quite good at maths and until he got to university. And then he noticed that there was a lot of, how he puts it, Asian people in his class. And he realized he was good at maths, but he wasn't naturally good at maths. They had a natural talent for it. So it's really, what is your natural talent? Passion, obviously, if you're passionate about something, you're going to enjoy it, you're likely to be good at it. And at the end of the day, you've got to be able to make a stable living from it. It's got to give you sort of predictable cash flow, investable surplus, these sorts of things, so that you're not struggling from year to year. Ultimately, money to a certain extent is very important in a household. I think most people would recognize that. And most people listening to this podcast probably don't need convincing of that. And the reality is that if you choose a job you hate, that doesn't really pay especially well, that's really hard to get financially ahead no matter how disciplined you are. And it's probably not going to add a lot to your enjoyment, your life enjoyment either. But if you find a job that you're passionate about, that you've got a genuine talent for, that can put food on the table, you're off to a great start towards building a fantastically rewarding career. Okay, so number 1 is your life partner, your spouse. Number 2 is your career you choose. And number 3 is your spending, saving philosophy. Now, note, I didn't say budget. I said philosophy. Now, the reason I say that is it's not really about your budget, because that's going to change from year to year, decade to decade, and so on. It's really around your relationship with money, and that can be formed either consciously or subconsciously, certainly in your teens or early 20s, and maybe even earlier, depending on, family experiences. At one end of the spectrum, some people live entirely for today, spend whatever they can get their hands on, enjoy the present as much as they possibly can, and give very little thought about what's going to happen tomorrow and how they're going to fund retirement and financial security. It's really very much live in the moment. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got some complete misers out there, deny themselves any small luxury throughout their life just so they can simply invest and save more. Now, they're both extremes, and I don't think those extremes are necessary. What really is necessary, or what's ideal probably, is to sit somewhere in the middle. But it's not a fixed point. We've got to realize that where we sit within that spectrum, whether it's closer to the miser or closer to the spender, might change depending on our financial position, stage of life, age, asset base, income, all those sorts of considerations. So there's going to be times in our life that we need the discipline to embrace delayed gratification, not go on the holiday, delay, upgrading the home, doing these sorts of things, particularly when we're trying to build our asset base. But also we need to give ourselves permission to spend more or enjoy more or invest less, depending on, if we're already well on the way to achieving financial independence and it doesn't require additional capital contribution from us. Maybe it just requires a little bit more time to let those investments mature and grow. Well, then maybe we can start spending some of that income and surplus income. And so having that philosophy will be really important, and making sure both spouses, if you do have a partner, share that philosophy is ideal, because ultimately what you want to do is you want to save and invest as much as you need, as much as necessary, but not more, so that you can enjoy the journey as much as possible, knowing that none of us know how long we've got left on this planet. So we certainly want to enjoy the weeks, months and years that pass by, whilst also still making sure sure that we're going to be secure in the future. And I spoke about this a few months ago, episode 402, which is called How to Avoid Working Too Long and Underspending in Retirement, but also extends to underspending during the working phase and accumulation phase too, especially if you're confident that you're on track to achieve your financial goals. And when it comes to saving, particularly at the beginning in terms of managing cash flow, automating that process is key. Something that, that I've certainly changed the nuance in the book Wealth by Design on, and something I'm going to share over the coming weeks, and how I've been using Claude to get better insights on my spending and cash flow management. And something, Claude is a AI tool, and something that I'm going to share, including some prompts. So those people that, like AI and like to use AI, it's pretty amazing what it can do. And it's very helpful, especially given that it can be difficult to track a whole bunch of different transaction amounts, but AI can certainly help us do that. Okay, I'm going to cheat a little bit because I said there's only 4 big decisions. Well, the fourth one is a handful of big tactical calls. So it's a bit dodgy, because really now I'm going to talk about 5. The fourth one is actually 5 big tactical calls that we typically make during our life. But I wanted to really bring it down to 4 because I wanted to demonstrate that the importance of those first 3, the right partner, the right career, and the right cash flow or spending philosophy, spending saving philosophy. I think those 3 are incredibly important, but maybe not as practical as, some of the stuff that I normally cover in the podcast. So I'm sort of changing my approach, but I really wanted to be upfront about that. And so the fourth is a handful of these big tactical calls, these big things that happen or occur during our lifetime. So the first one is the first property you buy. That is a huge financial decision. I've said before that the first property you buy is probably the most important property you buy in your lifetime. And the reason I say that is if you buy a good quality asset, an investment grade property, ideally just before or just at the beginning of a growth cycle, and you do that as soon as practical and as soon as safe to do so after you start your working career, the compounding impact can be extraordinary. I buy a property at 25. By the time I'm 30, I've got a lot of equity. However, if the first property I buy is an absolute dud, is a mistake, I buy it at the peak of the market, or I buy a fundamentally unsound property, and I do that at 25, it's entirely possible that I won't be better off by the time I'm 30. In fact, I could even be worse off. I could have negative equity in the property, particularly if it's a real dud. So buying the right asset at the right point in the cycle as soon as you possibly can have a huge compounding impact. Remember, if I do that and I'm miles ahead by the time I'm 30, I can utilize that equity and buy another investment property or gear into the share market. So just as bad decisions compound, so do good ones. The second one is where you live. And look, we tend to decide where we live based on many non-financial considerations. It could be driven by work, it could be driven by proximity of family or proximity to schools or education. But the reality is that if you randomly or accidentally pick a investment grade location, then, and you hold that property for 20, 30, 40 years, you only need to look at the baby boomers today, you're going to accidentally acquire a lot of wealth. Now, we don't buy a home to fund retirement, but it's a great plan B. It's a great fallback position. So if you end up buying a home in a great location, keep it for 30 years and mess up everything else, well, at least you've got a downgrader strategy. You can sell the house, pull some equity out, supplement your retirement savings, and then, buy a cheaper home, a more cost-effective home somewhere else. It's a great plan B or plan C to fall back upon. And I think given, the propensity for governments to change or tinker with negative gearing and capital gains tax, the home now is even a more attractive tax haven than what it used to be, especially, if they quarantine negative gearing, because you're not going to get negative gearing on your home. So it's just the same as an investment property, but you get no capital gains tax as well, which is even better. Third decision is where your super is invested. So which fund and which asset allocation, how is it invested? Because reducing fees and maximizing returns over a very long time horizon can make a massive massive difference. And that couldn't be more true today, given, someone that starts working today is putting 12% of their income in and will be doing that for their entire working life. It's huge. So even a 1% difference per annum over a 40-year period can result in a 30% higher balance. So that 1% might be made up of reducing the fee drag and increasing the return. So either or of those two things can move that dial. And you don't need to, it's unlikely you need to change super funds every year, but being completely passive and disinterested in it, you're leaving money on the table. I think it's an easy one to optimize. And as I promised, every July I produce a podcast episode to review the best super fund and looking at super fund returns for the financial year just gone. So next month I'll be doing that. And this time I'm in the process of preparing a much more detailed report. So, one of the bits of feedback I've got over previous years is, what about this? What about some retail funds? What about some other elements? So what I'm going to try and do is prepare a more comprehensive report this year, including and comparing more funds and more elements. And hopefully I'll build on it each and every year. And hopefully, the community, that the Investopoly community, can use that as a resource to share with other people that can benefit from it, but also as a resource to test check to make sure, are they in the right fund? Because it's a really easy win, since it's compulsory to invest in super every pay period. And with Payday Super, that money is going to be invested more regularly now. Employers now have to contribute into super within 7 days after they've paid you, which I think is a great enhancement that the government's made. Thanks to better technology these days, it's not that big a deal to do it from an employer's perspective. Okay, number 4 is how you invest outside super, or maybe I should change that to if you invest outside super, maybe if and how. Firstly, you've got to work out whether investing outside super is necessary. I think it'd be interesting actually to put some projections together for, someone that starts contributing 12% from the first day that they're working, to see how much money they'll end up having in super if they manage it really well. But I still think for most people want to have assets in addition to super, either underpin super and its returns, or to give you flexibility to retire sooner than age 60, particularly if the government pushes those age hurdles back at all. But the reality is, it really comes down to just a couple of decisions. Like, how you invest outside super might be, okay, I've decided to buy an investment property. Which property you buy and where is the key decision here. Once you've made that decision, okay, there's some optimization you can do after the fact, but that one decision is going to really dictate the outcomes, most of the outcomes, more than 80% of the outcomes. I mean, you can mess up the financing structure, you can mess up the ongoing management of that asset, but if you buy a really good asset, you're probably still going to do okay. And similarly, investing in the share market, you might initially go, well, I'm going to invest in the share market every month, and then you've got to decide, how am I going to do that? But once you decide how you're going to do it, as in, I'm not going to pick direct stocks, I'm going to use indexing, I'm going to keep it really broad based, I'm going to keep it evidence based. Well, that's the one decision. Okay, you repeat the implementation of that on a weekly or monthly basis, but that initial decision to start investing and how to use that is key. So again, it just comes down to just a couple of decisions. And fifth and final is whether you seek professional advice. That professional advice could be financial, property, could be tax or legal advice, whatever it is. And I'm not sitting here saying that everyone needs to pay for ongoing advice. That of course is stupid. Of course, not everyone needs ongoing advice, but there might be times in your life where you do need to pay for some sort of professional advice. I've said many times, one of my mentors constantly says professional advice is free, because the value you get from it should be worth more than its cost. Now, I know it's easy to say, but good professional advice, good timely professional advice is certainly free. Not every professional advice is free. So I think it's about understanding, and this is kind of the key thing, if you agree with me that there's just these key decisions that you absolutely need to nail, then realizing that if there's any uncertainty or any material uncertainty left that is outside your sphere of experience or knowledge, then you need to acknowledge that and get professional advice. Just like I do if it's a legal matter. I've paid buyer's agents before. Often the buyer's agents, well, in fact, the buyer's agents we refer to, I've paid their standard fees because I never wanted any conflict of interest there, but also I appreciate paying for good quality advice. And it's important to me that I eat my own cooking, that if I say this is what I would do if I was in your shoes, that I should follow follow that same advice as well. And I totally believe that, if I can get some advice that's going to save or make me, $50,000, I'm going to pay $10,000 to get that advice. To me, it's a no-brainer. Okay, so just to summarize, the first one is who you're going to spend the rest of your life with. The next one is your career decision. The next one is your philosophy around spending and saving. And finally, recognizing that there's around 5 big tactics that you might come across, when to get advice, what property to buy first, where you're going to live, how your super's invested, and how you're going to invest outside of super. They're the key things. Now, notice what's not on the list. It's not picking the best ETF. It's not trying to time the market. It's not trying to find the next Nvidia or anything like that. And it is at odds with the financial media because they devote most of their attention to all those matters, but they're barely going to move the dial. What really moves the dial are those big life decisions. And I think it's liberating then to realize that you don't have to make hundreds of great financial decisions and get everyone right. There's only probably less than 20 financial decisions that you need to make throughout your life that you absolutely nail. Then you're going to, as I said in the beginning, probably generate 95% of the possible good outcomes. And equally, if you're in a financial position that you're not completely satisfied with, it's good to then reflect on what decisions do I need to make differently? What are those big decisions that I might have messed up and I need to course correct? Okay, I might leave it there for today. Every Thursday for the next 7 weeks, I've got 7 weeks left, I'm going to publish an extra episode where I'm talking about the 8 rules from my new book, Wealth by Design, and just exploring how my thinking has changed since I wrote Investopoly 8 years ago. So as I said, some I've completely changed, others are just a bit of nuance and tightening. So tomorrow I'm talking about rule number 2, which I've really reframed as your freedom number. And there's really sort of 3 levels to that number. And that's how I've evolved since Investopoly. So I hope you can join me tomorrow. And until then, bye for now. Before I go, my new book, Wealth by Design, is now available for pre-order. Pre-orders matter more than you think. They're used by bookstores and online retailers to decide how many copies of the book to stock. So, as a huge favour to me, if you're considering buying the book, I'd really appreciate it if you pre-ordered it now rather than wait. And the part that I'm most excited about isn't really the book itself, it's the AI companion tool that I've built to go with it. I reckon it's a game changer, and I'd love you to see why. The pre-order links are in the show notes. Thanks a lot.